When my 12-year-old son stood up during my father's funeral and walked to the front of the chapel, no one said a word, not even me. I was frozen in place, unsure whether to stop him or let him go. I just watched as he pulled a crumpled envelope from his blazer pocket and said, "Clear as a bell." My grandpa sent me a letter before he died. He asked me to read it today. And that's when it happened. Every single face changed. My brother's smug expression disappeared. People shifted in their pews. Some looked down, others leaned forward. And in that moment, those few impossible seconds, I could feel something shift in the air. The weight of years, of silence, of what was never said, all pressing down at once. But before I tell you what Micah read, I need to tell you what led to that moment. Because you need to understand the truth. Not just about my father, but about me, my brother, and how a single child's voice can echo louder than generations of silence. My name is Jessa Linford. I'm 42 years old, a nurse, a single mom, and a daughter who spent most of her life trying not to disappoint a man who never once told me he was proud of me. My father, Henry Linford, was a man who believed in hard work, discipline, and loyalty. He built everything from the ground up, his business, our house, our family image. But somewhere along the way, love got buried under expectations. Emotion, softness, even affection. It wasn't that they didn't exist, it was that they didn't belong. Not in his world, especially not for daughters. My brother Nate, on the other hand, was everything Dad wanted. Strong-willed, ambitious, a future lawyer with straight A's, and a chip on his shoulder the size of our hometown. He burned out fast, dropped out of law school, ended up selling cars. And somehow, in my father's eyes, he was still the success story. Me? I got married too young, divorced too late, and had a child without any of the structure my dad believed in. I chose love and lost it. I chose motherhood over money. To him, I was soft, aimless. A survivor, yes, but not someone to be proud of. And still, I never stopped hoping he'd say the words. Now here we were, seated in a chapel filled with roses and regrets, my father's casket front and center. Nate had just finished giving his eulogy, and in true Nate fashion, ended it by looking straight at the crowd and saying, "At least he wasn't disappointed in me." The air cracked like glass. No one responded. No gasps, no whispers, just an awful silence that made my skin go cold. I looked at Micah sitting beside me in his little black suit, legs swinging just above the floor. He was quiet, but I could feel something stirring in him. He'd always had a kind of stillness that made people listen when he finally spoke. I didn't know then what he was about to do. I only knew that his eyes were locked on the front of the chapel. And then he stood up. No prompting. No announcement. He just rose from his seat, straightened his jacket like a man twice his age, and walked the long center aisle toward the podium where my brother had just thrown a dagger into my heart. I wanted to call his name, stop him, shield him. But something in me said, "Let him speak." He reached the front. People turned. Nate stared at him like he didn't recognize him. Then Micah pulled out a letter. A simple white envelope with handwriting I instantly recognized. Sharp, all caps, unmistakable. My father's. Micah held it up and said, "My grandpa sent me a letter before he died. He asked me to read it today." And in that one sentence, the funeral changed. The story changed. Everything changed. This isn't just a story about grief, it's about truth, family, what goes unsaid for too long, and how sometimes the person who sees the clearest is the one you least expect. Micah was about to read something that no one in that room had ever seen, not even me. And the words he shared, they didn't just bring my father back into the room, they rewrote everything we thought we knew about him. My father always said that emotions were like loose wires. If you didn't control them, they'd burn the whole damn house down. He wasn't cruel, not in the way people think of cruelty. He never yelled, never hit. He didn't slam doors or break things. No, my father's silence was sharper than any raised voice. He disciplined with distance, and it worked. At least in his world it did. We grew up in a modest 2-story home in Millersville, Ohio. Brick chimney, wide porch, a flag out front, always straightened, never faded. My mother passed when I was 14, and from that moment on, my father became both roof and storm, keeping everything intact, even if it meant we lived under clouds. I learned quickly that he measured love in discipline. If you weren't corrected, it meant he didn't care. Praise was rare and rationed, like heat in winter, and if you cried, you did it quietly behind closed doors with a tissue, not tears. My older brother, Nate, 4 years my senior, thrived in that environment at first. He was the star quarterback in high school, the class president, and the golden boy my dad pinned all his hopes on. They worked side by side every summer, fixing the fence, replacing shingles, changing the oil in Dad's pickup like it was some sacred ritual. But even Nate cracked under the weight eventually. He got into a good college, started law school in Michigan, and then, just like that, he dropped out. Said he didn't see the point anymore. My father didn't scream. He didn't lecture. He just stopped calling. Meanwhile, I was invisible. Quiet, obedient, reliable, in the way middle children often are. I didn't dream big. I didn't disappoint loudly. I married a man my father didn't like but never spoke about. When that marriage turned violent and I walked away with nothing but my son, my father helped me pay for a new apartment, but never asked what happened. He just said, "Make sure the boy's in school on time." That was his version of love, conditional, controlled. Micah was born in winter, on a night when the hospital's generator kicked on because of an ice storm. I remember holding him under flickering fluorescent lights, thinking, "You will not grow up in silence, I promised him that," even if I didn't fully know how to keep it. Surprisingly, my father took to Micah in a way I hadn't expected. He would sit with him for hours on our back porch, just watching the birds or telling stories from his military days. Never overly affectionate, but present. And that presence was more than I ever got. Micah, for his part, adored him. He asked questions about everything. Why Grandpa's hands had scars, why he always ironed his shirts, why he never smiled in pictures. And I think in those questions, my father found something he'd been missing. A second chance, maybe. Or someone small enough to forgive what the rest of us couldn't. They started exchanging letters about 2 years ago, after my father's arthritis kept him from driving. Handwritten ones. Micah would mail one every Sunday, and a reply would come back by Thursday. They never let me read them. I asked once, jokingly, and Micah said, "It's just Grandpa stuff. Boring." I believed him, until the day of the funeral. When my father died, he left no will, no instructions, no emotional goodbye, just a neat formal obituary that Nate wrote. Henry Linford, 76, Army veteran, business owner, survived by 2 children and a grandson. I was barely a sentence. The morning of the service, the sky was the color of wet concrete, the kind of overcast that feels like a bad omen. I dressed Micah in a little black suit he hated. He said he looked like a lawyer. I told him he looked like someone brave. We arrived just before it began. The chapel smelled like lilies and old hymnals. People murmured in small, awkward groups. Some looked at me like they didn't know what to say. Others didn't look at all. I sat near the back with Micah, where I always felt safest. Nate was up front talking to a cousin about stocks or politics. I couldn't hear, but I recognized the tone. Always loud, always sure. I kept my coat on. I didn't want to feel the air. My hands were shaking, and I hated that I still wanted my father's approval, even in death. Micah leaned against my shoulder. "He liked lilies," he said quietly. "Grandpa. He told me that once." I turned to him. "He never told me." Micah just shrugged. "You never asked." That moment stuck with me, because maybe I never did. Maybe I stopped trying years ago, and maybe Micah was the only one who ever really knew my father. There's a moment in every funeral when the formalities give way to something rawer. It's the space between ritual and reality, when people stop pretending and start revealing. That moment came when my brother Nate stepped up to the podium. The pastor had just wrapped up a somber prayer. A soft hymn echoed from the organ. Then Nate rose from the front pew like a man preparing for a campaign speech. He straightened his blazer, glanced once at the casket, then turned to face the room. The chapel fell quiet. I sat 2 rows from the back with Micah beside me, hands folded tightly in my lap. I told myself not to expect anything from Nate, no grace, no dignity, but somehow I still hoped. He was the oldest, the favorite. Maybe, just once, he'd remember we were all grieving. Instead, he cleared his throat and said, "My father was a hard man, but a good man." That's how he started. Typical Nate. He launched into a tidy list of achievements. Army service, 32 years running his own home repair business, coaching Little League, never missing a mortgage payment. He made it sound like a resume, like a eulogy was just another box to check. I used to think he was tough on me, he said with a self-satisfied smile, but now I know it was because he believed in me. He saw something in me. He didn't want me to waste it. People around me nodded. A few murmured, mm-hmm, under their breath, and then he paused. A long, uncomfortable pause. I don't know how everyone else feels, he said, scanning the room, but I take comfort in this. At least he wasn't disappointed in me. The words didn't land like a tribute. They landed like a slap. I felt my stomach drop, my spine went cold. I looked at the floor, then at Micah. His jaw tightened slightly, but he didn't look up. He just stared straight ahead, his small hands clenched together in his lap. There were no gasps, no interruptions, just silence. But I could feel it. A shift, a tension, like a collective breath being held. That was always Nate. He knew how to wound you and make it sound like wisdom. At least he wasn't disappointed in me. It wasn't just a dig. It was a declaration. A line drawn right through our family, cutting me out of whatever legacy my father left behind. My chest tightened, not because it was unexpected, but because it wasn't. Nate had always measured his worth against mine, like my existence was some kind of deficit he needed to balance out. The truth was, I had disappointed my father. I knew it, or at least I believed I had. I didn't follow his blueprint. I didn't remarry. I didn't make money. I chose to raise Micah alone in a one-bedroom apartment above a pharmacy while working double shifts in the ER. I chose survival, not success. And in my father's eyes, that made me less. I felt tears prickling, but I swallowed them back. This wasn't the time to cry. Not in front of these people. Not when Nate had just cast his judgment in stone. Then I felt something I didn't expect. Micah's hand, slipping quietly into mine. I looked down at him. He wasn't crying. He wasn't angry. He was calm, alert, like he'd been waiting for this, like he understood something the rest of us had missed. Then, without a word, he let go of my hand and stood up. At first, I thought he was just stretching, maybe trying to escape the awkward silence. But no, he began walking toward the front. I reached out instinctively, whispering, "Micah, wait." He paused, turned to me, and said softly, "It's okay, Mom. I need to." He continued down the center aisle, his black dress shoes tapping gently against the tile floor. Every head turned to follow him. Even Nate froze, eyes narrowed in confusion. Micah reached the front of the chapel, climbed the small steps to the podium, and stood there for a moment. Just a boy, barely 5 feet tall, facing a room full of adults and unspoken pain. Then he pulled a white envelope from his jacket pocket. He held it up. "My grandpa sent me a letter before he died," he said clearly. "He asked me to read it today." And just like that, every single face changed. Eyes widened, shoulders straightened. Nate's jaw clenched. Even I didn't know what was coming. Micah unfolded the paper. The silence now wasn't awkward. It was electric, and I realized this wasn't just a funeral anymore. This was something else entirely. This was the moment my father finally decided to speak. In every life, there's a moment when someone else's choice cracks you open, and you see yourself, maybe for the first time. Micah standing at that podium was that moment for me. He looked small, too small, next to the dark walnut casket and the heavy velvet curtains behind him. His dress shirt was slightly wrinkled. His hair was neatly combed the way I had insisted that morning, even though he complained about it for half an hour. But now, standing in front of all those people, he didn't fidget. He didn't hesitate. He looked like he belonged there. He unfolded the letter with careful fingers, the kind of stillness only a child who understands the weight of a moment can hold. I recognized the letter instantly, my father's blocky, precise handwriting on the envelope. It was unmistakable. He used to write like every letter was a blueprint. Micah took a breath. Before he even spoke, I felt a dozen things at once. Fear, shame, pride, confusion, and the hardest one to name, hope. Because whatever was in that letter, it hadn't been shared with me. I hadn't known it existed. I didn't even know they were still writing to each other. Micah raised his eyes and said, "This is a letter from my grandpa, Henry Linford. He wrote it 4 days before he passed. He told me to wait until today to read it." The crowd leaned forward. You could hear the creak of wooden pews, a cough in the back, the shuffling of someone adjusting their jacket. No one dared speak. And me? I was holding my breath, because I had no idea what was coming, and yet I felt like my entire life was about to be rewritten. Micah began to read. "Dear Micah, if you're reading this, it means I've gone and done what I couldn't avoid, left you before I was ready. Truth is, I'm not sure I would have ever been ready. There are things I need you and everyone else to hear, things I never said because I thought silence was safer than truth. I was wrong." He paused, swallowed, then looked out at the room. My grandfather wrote, "I wasn't a perfect father. I wasn't even a good one most days. I wanted my kids to grow strong, so I taught them to push through pain. But somewhere along the way, I forgot to show them how to heal from it. That was my mistake." I blinked hard. My hands were trembling in my lap. Nate shifted in his seat, face frozen in a tight, unreadable expression. Micah kept reading. "Jessa, if you're there, and I hope you are, this part is for you. I judged you by the wrong standards. I thought strength looked like control, like silence. But you showed me a different kind of strength. You walked away from a bad man. You raised your boy with grace I didn't deserve to witness. You gave more than you took. You made a life out of scraps, and I never told you I saw it. But I did, and I was proud of you." I felt a crack deep inside me, like a dam giving way. My father's words, carried by my son, reached a place nothing else ever had. It wasn't just that he wrote them, it was that he gave them to Micah to deliver. Like he knew he couldn't say them to my face while he was alive. Micah glanced at me, just briefly, and something passed between us, an understanding I'll never be able to put into words. He turned back to the letter. "Nate, I wanted you to be a leader, but I forgot to teach you how to follow your heart. That was my failure, too. You were never supposed to carry all my pride and none of my love. I'm sorry if I made you think praise was the same as affection." Nate looked like someone had knocked the wind out of him. He wasn't smirking anymore. His eyes were wet, his hands clenched into fists. Micah took another breath and read the closing. "Tell your mother I loved her until the end. Tell Micah to ask hard questions, and tell yourselves the truth, even when it hurts. That's what makes a family stronger than silence ever will." With that, Micah folded the letter carefully, almost reverently, and placed it on the podium. "I miss him," he said quietly, not reading now, just speaking. "But I think he finally saw us, all of us." He stepped down and walked back toward me. Everyone watched him, but not like they were watching a child. They watched him like they were seeing something sacred, something brave. When he sat beside me, I wrapped my arms around him. For the first time in years, I felt something break, and then something mend. My son had delivered the words, "My father never could," and in doing so, he gave us all a way forward. There are moments in life where time doesn't just slow down, it splinters. Micah stepped down from the podium and walked back to his seat, his dress shoes tapping softly on the chapel floor. But it felt louder somehow, louder than Nate's voice, louder than the silence my father kept wrapped around his love for decades, louder than every unspoken truth we'd buried along with him. As he sat down beside me, I took his hand without thinking. My palms were damp, my heart racing, but Micah was calm, grounded. He looked up at me and whispered, "I think he really meant it." I couldn't speak. My throat was too tight. My father, who once said the only thing a man leaves behind is his reputation, had used his last words not to defend it, but to dismantle it. And in doing so, he finally let me see the man behind the armor. The room was completely still. No one moved. Not the cousins who had whispered gossip for years. Not my Aunt Carol, who always said I should have tried harder to fix my marriage. Not even Nate, who now sat slouched in the pew like the wind had been knocked out of him. It was Nate who finally broke the silence. He stood up, slowly, eyes still locked on the podium like he couldn't quite believe what he'd heard. He walked toward the front. At first, I thought he might try to reclaim the moment, to explain away the words in the letter, or worse, deny them. But when he reached the podium, he didn't look at the crowd. He looked at Micah. "I didn't know he wrote you," Nate said. His voice cracked on the last word. Micah nodded but didn't speak. He didn't need to. Nate turned toward me. For the first time in years, his face wasn't smug or dismissive. It was vulnerable, exposed. He looked like a man who had just realized he'd been living in the shadow of something he never understood. "I used to think he was only hard on you because you didn't do things his way," Nate said. "I thought I earned his approval. I thought I was the one who made him proud." His voice dropped. "But I don't think I knew him at all." There it was. The truth, unvarnished, uncomfortable, but finally out in the open. "I'm sorry, Jessa," Nate said, "for what I said earlier. That wasn't fair, and it wasn't true." People began to murmur quietly. Some nodded. One of my father's old army buddies dabbed at his eyes with a wrinkled handkerchief. The room had softened. The edges had melted. For the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like I was just enduring the moment. It felt like I was part of it. I stood up, legs shaky, and joined Nate at the front. We stood beside each other, awkward and uncertain. Two grown children carrying decades of resentment and silence between us. I thought about reaching for his hand. I didn't. But I didn't need to. He turned to me and said, "He should have said all that to you years ago." I nodded. "Yeah, but I'm glad he at least said it now." Micah came forward again. He didn't say anything, just wrapped his arms around both of us, his head against my side, one hand on Nate's jacket. And in that embrace, something happened I didn't expect. We became a family again, not the one we used to be, not the one built on control and performance. Something new, something real. When the service ended, people began to gather around us, not with platitudes, not with shallow condolences, but with real connection. "I didn't know your dad felt that way," said Mrs. Reynolds, our old neighbor. "He never told anyone." "I think he was trying," I said, at the end. And maybe that's what mattered most. Not that he changed everything, but that he tried. That he finally reached across the chasm he created and left a bridge behind for us to walk across. Later that night, when we were home, I found Micah sitting at the kitchen table with a notebook open and a pencil in hand. "What are you writing?" I asked. "A letter," he said. "To Grandpa?" He shook his head. "To you." And just like that, I started crying for the second time that day. Not because I was broken, but because for the first time in my life, I felt seen. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every second of the day. My father's funeral, Nate's words, Micah's voice steady and clear as he read a letter none of us expected. And the part that stuck with me the most, the part that wrapped itself around my chest, was that my father had seen me. Not perfectly, not loudly, but fully. And he used his final breath, in the form of ink on paper, to tell me he was proud. I had spent most of my adult life bracing myself against his silence. Every achievement of mine, whether big or small, felt like a question left unanswered. When I left my husband, all I got from Dad was a terse, "Glad you got out." When I passed my nurse licensing exams, he said, "So what's next?" Not once in all those years did I hear, "I'm proud of you." Until today. And somehow, hearing it after he was gone mattered more than I expected. I got out of bed and padded into the kitchen, needing something. Water, quiet, anything to help me feel grounded again. I wasn't surprised to see the light on and Micah still sitting at the table. He was still writing in the notebook I'd seen earlier. "You should be asleep," I whispered. He smiled. "So should you." I poured a glass of water and sat down across from him. "You said you were writing a letter? To me?" He slid the notebook across the table, and for a moment I hesitated. Then I opened it. "Dear Mom, today was weird and hard and kind of good too. I think Grandpa knew what he was doing. I think he wanted you to finally hear the things he couldn't say when he was alive. I don't know why people wait so long to say important things, but I promise I won't. So I'll just say it now. I'm proud of you. I'm proud you're my mom. You always show up, even when it's hard. And I see you, even when you think no one does. Love, Micah." I wiped my eyes with the sleeve of my sweatshirt. My voice broke as I said, "You didn't have to write this." "I know," he said, "but you deserved it." That line, you deserved it, sat with me longer than any condolence from the chapel, because I had spent so much of my life believing I didn't, that maybe I had failed in some fundamental way as a daughter, as a sister, even as a mother. But Micah? He didn't just love me. He believed in me, and he wasn't afraid to say it. That's when I realized this was the legacy my father had unknowingly handed down, not through discipline or silence or stoicism, but through Micah, through a child who was brave enough to speak when the adults weren't, who had listened to his grandfather not out of fear, but out of curiosity, who had learned how to be open-hearted in a family that had long been closed off. Micah wasn't carrying forward the old ways. He was rewriting the blueprint. The next morning, I tucked my father's letter into a wooden keepsake box in my closet. I placed it gently beside a photo of him holding Micah on the porch, both of them wearing baseball caps, neither of them smiling, but their hands were locked, and that meant something. I also added Micah's letter, side by side, 2 generations, 2 letters, 2 chances to say what mattered. Over the weeks that followed, Nate and I talked more than we had in years. Not everything was fixed. We had history to untangle, and forgiveness doesn't come with a fast-forward button. But we weren't walking around each other anymore. We were learning how to speak again, to ask questions, to listen. People often say funerals bring families together. I don't think that's always true. But sometimes, if the truth shows up, even late, they can bring you back to yourself. That's what this was for me, a return, a reckoning, a release. I used to believe that love had to be spoken in real time to count, that if someone died before saying, "I love you" or "I'm proud of you," the words lost their power. But I was wrong, because when you spend your whole life holding your breath, even the faintest whisper of truth can feel like oxygen. And when my son stood up at my father's funeral with a letter in his pocket and light in his eyes, he gave me more than closure. He gave me a beginning. There's something my father wrote in that letter that I haven't been able to forget. He said, "Tell yourselves the truth, even when it hurts." That line, those few simple words, have reshaped everything for me. Because the truth is, we spend so much of our lives waiting for the right moment to say what matters. We assume there will be more time, more chances, more words, but sometimes we don't get another chance. Sometimes the letter comes too late, and sometimes, if we're lucky, it still finds the right voice. So, if this story made you feel something, if it reminded you of someone you've lost, or someone you still need to forgive, or something left unsaid, don't wait. Pick up the phone, write the letter, have the conversation, tell the truth, speak the words while they still have time to land in someone's heart. And if this story spoke to your heart, I'd love for you to help it reach someone else. Please give this video a like, share it with someone who might need it, and leave a comment below. I read every single one, and your stories matter too. And if you want more stories like this, stories about truth, family, healing, and the moments that shape us, hit that subscribe button and join this growing community. We don't just tell stories here, we listen. Thank you for watching, and thank you, Micah, for reminding me how powerful the truth can be when it's finally spoken out loud.